Los Animas County, Colorado Territory on an early autumn morning in 1880 was the kind of clear and cold that made the mountains look closer than they were. The cottonwoods along the creek ran gold. The sky was the particular blue that comes after the first cold night, and the stage had just set Temperance Bell down at the end of a property road and driven on without looking back. She stood with her carpetbag in both hands and looked at the ranch ahead. The house was intact. The fence was sound. Smoke was coming from the chimney, which she had not expected from a place whose owner had sent for her. There was a man crossing the yard from the barn, not hurrying, not performing the crossing, just walking toward her with the deliberate pace of someone who has decided how he is going to do a difficult thing and is now doing it. She knew before he reached her. She could see it in the way he walked. He was not the man she had come for. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Miss Bell." "I'm Cade Marsh. I'm your neighbor." She held the carpetbag in both hands and was very still. "Mr. Aller passed," he said, quietly, clearly, with the respect of a man who has thought about how to say this and has said it as well as it can be said. 3 weeks ago. A chest fever. I'm sorry you weren't told in time." She stood in the yard while the news settled. It was a very still morning. The cottonwoods were absolutely gold. The mountains stood on the western horizon and did not offer any opinion. She set the carpetbag down on the ground. One deliberate movement. She stood with her hands free, looking at the house. "He had animals," she said. "They're fed," Cade said. "I've been coming." She said, "I need to go inside." He held the door. But what she didn't know, standing in that yard with her hands free and the empty space of the plan in front of her, was who was already there. Who had been there before she arrived? Who was going to keep being there? She had come 2 months and spent nearly everything she had. What she was going to do next, she had no idea. What she didn't know was who was already there. But to understand why Temperance Bell got off the stage in Colorado, with no plan and no one waiting, we have to go back to the morning she decided to come. Early autumn 1880. Temperance had been making decisions alone since she was old enough to understand that no one else was going to make them for her, and she was good at it. She read the situation clearly. She assessed the options accurately. She chose the direction that made the most sense and went that way without second-guessing. She had read the advertisement in March. She had read it twice. She had written Aller that evening, not because she was romantic about it, but because the situation in Ohio had a shape she could see the entire outline of. And the shape included a clear ceiling, and she had more left in her than the ceiling permitted. The correspondence was excellent. Aller wrote honestly and asked honest questions and answered hers with the same quality of plainness. He was a decent man. She was certain of this from the third letter. She continued the correspondence because she was certain of it. And certainty was what she required before she spent $70 and 2 months of her life. She had spent the $70. She had spent the 2 months. She had arrived at a house that smelled like someone else's life, and a neighbor who had maintained it for 3 weeks out of loyalty to a man he had considered a friend. He had done this before she knew she was coming. He had kept the animals fed and the equipment maintained and the place from going cold. Before anyone had sent for him, before there was a reason that included her. She thought about this on the first morning in the Aller kitchen, with her hands around a coffee cup and the September light coming through the east window. She had approximately enough money for a stage ticket back to Ohio and almost nothing after that. She had the option of leaving on the next stage. She calculated this out in her head, the way she calculated most things, or of staying for 6 weeks and seeing if anything became clear. The ranch was in probate. She had no claim on it. Her situation in the house was informal at best. Cade came the following morning with Mrs. Cordell, a warm-faced woman from the nearest town who brought a covered dish, and the frank intention of making sure Temperance was not alone in this. He made no reference to Temperance's situation, or what she might or might not decide to do. He simply walked through the yard and fixed a gate latch that had been loose. She could see it had been loose for some time, and fed the horses and went on his way. She watched him through the kitchen window. Mrs. Cordell asked her about Ohio, and she answered. Mrs. Cordell said Cade Marsh had been out here every morning since Aller died, before the stage, before anyone knew she was coming. Temperance said, I know. She did know. It was visible in everything. The condition of the yard, the state of the equipment, the horses fed and sound. You could read his presence in the place the same way you could read anyone's consistent care. What sort of man is he? She said. Mrs. Cordell said, the kind that does what's right without requiring an audience for it. Temperance filed this. She filed it the way she filed most things, carefully, for future use. She set herself a 6-week limit. 6 weeks to assess the situation clearly and decide. She made this decision with the same practical thoroughness she had made all her other decisions, and she told herself she was approaching it as a question of options and not as anything else. 3 days in, she sat at the Aller writing desk and did the account on paper. She had done something like this before the first stage ticket, laid it all out column by column what was true about the situation. She did it again now. Column 1, what she had, what she knew, what the ranch was worth in its present condition. Column 2, what she could do from here, given the county and her skills and the 6-week window. Column 3, what she observed about Cade Marsh from the evidence available, which was considerable. She came to the end of the columns and looked at them. The columns did not tell her to stay. They told her that staying was a reasonable option, which was not nothing. They told her that the person who had been maintaining the Aller Ranch before she arrived was a specific kind of man, and that the specific kind was worth knowing more about. She put the paper away. She went to find out about the horses. Cade was in the barn when she got there. He was doing something precise and methodical to the horse's near foreleg, with the attention of a man who does not hurry something that should not be hurried. He looked up when she came in. What does he need? She said. About the horse. He explained. She listened and asked 2 questions that told him she had been around horses before. He told her more. They stood in the barn in the autumn morning and talked about horses with the ease of 2 practical people who have found common ground and are comfortable there, and by the time they came back into the daylight, she had been in his company for 40 minutes and had learned several things she intended to keep. He fed the animals every morning. He stayed out of her way except when he was needed. He fixed things that needed fixing without making a comment about the fixing. He drove her to the nearest town for supplies in the 2nd week and introduced her to the postmaster and the general store owner and spoke about her presence in Los Animas County with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who has already decided she is staying and is simply filling in the community on developments. She noticed this. She did not say anything about it. Mrs. Cordell came back Thursday, and the Thursday after that, and the one after that. She brought food and company and the particular gift of a practical woman who asks real questions and listens to real answers. She said at the end of the 3rd visit that she was glad Temperance was in the county. Temperance said, "So am I." It was the first time she had said it. The saying of it surprised her slightly, which told her it was true. At the end of the 4th week, the county probate moved. A county officer arrived to document the Aller property and noted, in Temperance's presence, that the homestead claim would revert to the county in 60 days unless a valid filing was made. He said it as information, not as a threat. He left. Kate arrived, as he did every morning. He came inside when she showed him the county notice. He sat at the table. "What do you want?" he said. She looked at him. "Not what are you going to do," he said. "What do you want?" She thought about the columns she had made, the honest accounting of the situation, the assessment she had been conducting for 4 weeks with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to everything. She looked at the carpetbag on the porch table, where he had put it that first morning. She looked at Aller's letters on the writing desk, placed there 3 days after she arrived. She looked at the corral gate through the window, and she thought about every morning she had watched him walk through it. "I want to stay in Los Animas County," she said. He said, "All right. Not at the Aller Ranch," she said. "I have no claim here and I don't want one." "In the county. Near the marsh spread, if that makes sense." He was quiet for a moment. His jaw was set in the particular way she had come to recognize, the way of a man who has been holding something back because the timing was not right and has now decided the timing is right. "I want you to know something," he said. "I've been coming here every morning since Aller died. Before the stage, before anyone knew you were coming." "I know," she said. "I want you to know," he said, "that I know the difference between a woman in a hard situation and a woman I want near the marsh spread." She held very still. His eyes were steady and his hands were flat on the table, and he was saying this the way he said most things, plainly, specifically, with no ornamentation. She said, "I do too." The kitchen was very quiet. The carpetbag on the porch table, the corral gate, the county notice between them on the table. She had come 2 months for one thing and found another. The other was not what she had planned. It was not a consolation. It was what was here, present and real and specific, and she was a woman who dealt with what was real. She dealt with it. The Aller property went through its probate and was claimed the following year by a distant relation. Temperance was not in it. She had been at the Marsh Ranch since October, plainly and honestly, the way 2 practical people arrange a practical life. Mrs. Cordell was at the county church the morning of their formal arrangement, looking pleased with a satisfaction that was 11 weeks in the making. The carpetbag was in the main bedroom at the Marsh Ranch. No one who had seen it there believed it was going anywhere. On the first morning of the following spring, she was at the fence line with Cade, walking the boundary of the spread, and he was telling her what each section had cost to build, and she was asking the kind of questions that told him she was already thinking of it as hers. Some things you do not find by going toward them. You find them by going toward something else, and paying attention when you arrive. You set your bag down in a yard and stand with your hands free and look at the house in front of you, and what you thought was nothing turns out to be the beginning of something. Temperance Bell had arrived at the collapse of everything she had planned. What was left, when the plan was gone, was Cade Marsh at the corral gate, and the simple fact that he had been coming every morning before she existed in his world. That was sufficient. That was, in the end, everything. If you have ever had the plan taken from you and discovered what was left was better than the plan, you know what she felt, walking that fence line in the April light. Stay close. There are more stories from the frontier ahead. There is a specific kind of courage that belongs to practical people. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It consists of looking at a situation clearly, making the accurate accounting of what is true, and proceeding on the basis of what you find. Temperance had been doing this her whole life. She had done it looking at Ohio, the shape of what was available, the clear ceiling, the decision to answer an advertisement in a farm journal and send $70 westward on 4 months of letters. She had done it in the yard at the Aller Ranch, set the bag down, stood with her hands free, looked at the house, and proceeded on the basis of what was in front of her. And she did it now, every morning at the Marsh Ranch, with the same methodical attention she had always brought to things worth understanding. The spread was 280 acres, 90 head, 4 working horses and Cade, and now her. She learned it the same way she had learned every other thing she had needed to know, specifically, in order, asking when she didn't understand something, and filing the answers when she did. She learned the pasture rotation schedule. She learned which sections of fence needed watching in the spring runoff. She learned the horses by name and by character, because Cade had introduced them with the seriousness of a man introducing people he was responsible for, and she had understood from that introduction that the horses mattered and had given them the appropriate quality of attention. She learned Cade Marsh himself, which was the most useful study. He was not a demonstrative man. He did not explain himself or his decisions at length. He did things, and the doing of them was the explanation, and if you paid attention, you could read his thinking in the pattern of the doing. She was good at paying attention. She had been good at it since she was 12 years old, and had understood that paying attention was how you stayed ahead of whatever was coming next. He had maintained the Aller Ranch for 3 weeks before she came. She had known this was significant since Mrs. Cordell mentioned it. She had been watching for confirmation of it ever since. Every morning that he appeared at the Aller gate, before she had asked him, before there was a reason that involved her, was confirmation. He did right things because they were right. He did not require an audience. That was the most specific thing she could say about him, and she had met enough people to know it was very rare. She thought about Aller's letters sometimes, the ones on the writing desk. She had read them so many times between Ohio and Colorado that she could have reproduced several of them from memory. They were the letters of a decent man. She had been certain of that by the 3rd one, and she had gone on corresponding and planning and traveling because she had been right about his decency. He had been decent enough to write honestly. He had been decent enough that his neighbor had maintained his property for 3 weeks out of loyalty. She honored that. She sat at his writing desk one afternoon, early in the 2nd week, and put her hands flat on the surface, and said something quiet that was between her and the record of a man she had never met. And then she stood up and went back to the practical business of figuring out what came next. What came next was the fence line, and the horses, and the account books Cade showed her in the 4th week, with the matter-of-fact directness of a man who thinks the person he is working alongside should understand what the operation is worth. She looked at the numbers. She looked at him. He said, "Does that make sense?" She said, "Yes. You're running conservatively on the cattle numbers." He said, "I've been running it alone." She said, "What would you run if you weren't?" He said, 120, maybe 130. The north section has more carry capacity than I'm using." She looked at the accounts again. She did the arithmetic in her head. "By next fall," she said. "If the spring is reasonable," he said. She nodded. She closed the account book and gave it back to him and said she wanted to see the north section. He took her there that afternoon. They walked the section in the October light, the mountains at the western edge going red gold, and he told her what each part of it was worth and what it would take to bring it to the higher capacity. She listened and asked the right questions, and he answered them without impatience, and by the time they turned back toward the house, she had understood the north section completely. "You know this land," she said. 7 years of it," he said. "It's a good spread," she said. He looked at her sideways. "Yes," he said. "It is." They walked back in the October afternoon. The mountains were very large, and the light was very clear, and the spread ran around them in every direction, green going tan at the edges where the first frost had been. She thought about the fence line that was going to be hers, about the section they had just walked, about the account books and the horses, and the morning she had arrived at the Aller yard and put the carpetbag down. She had come for one thing. She had found something else. The something else was a 280-acre spread, with a north section running at partial capacity, and a man who knew every inch of it. She was going to know every inch of it too. She had already started. The first morning of the following spring she was at the fence line, before the light was fully up. Not because Cade had asked her to be there, he had not, but because the spring pasture rotation began that day, and she wanted to walk the line before the cattle went to the new section, to check the fence condition herself and form her own assessment before comparing it with his. She came to the corner post and put her hand on the top rail. The wood was solid. The fence was sound. The view from here was all of the north section in the early light, the grass beginning to green after the winter. Cade came up behind her a few minutes later. He had been in the barn when she left, and had followed without making a particular thing of it. He stood beside her and looked at the north section. "It looks right," she said. "It is right," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the section with the flat attention of a man reviewing something he has worked on carefully and is satisfied with the result. She turned back to the north section. The light was growing. The grass was very green. 120 head would be better than 90 for this acreage. The arithmetic was sound. She had come 2 months and spent nearly everything she had on a plan that had not been waiting for her when she arrived. What had been waiting was this: a good spread at partial capacity, and a man who did right things because they were right, and a north section that needed one more person paying attention to it. She was paying attention. She understood, exactly where she was supposed to be. Mrs. Cordell came in November with bread in her direct face, and sat at the Marsh Ranch kitchen table and looked around with the approving expression of a woman who has been paying close attention and finds her attention rewarded. "The place looks different," she said. "The kitchen curtains are new," Temperance said. "That isn't what I mean, Mrs. Cordell said." She stayed 2 hours that time. She talked about the county news, the supply road improvement north of town, the new family at the Olander parcel, and she asked Temperance about the cattle schedule and the horse situation, and the fence work she had done along the east section in October. She asked very casually what Temperance thought of the north section. Temperance said it was running below its capacity, and she expected to see the numbers increase by fall. Mrs. Cordell said, "I imagine you will." She said it with a particular quality, the quality of a woman who has seen how something was going to turn out, and is watching it turn out that way, and finds the watching satisfying. Temperance said, "You knew." Mrs. Cordell said, "I suspected." Temperance looked at her. Mrs. Cordell said, "I suspected from the third morning, when I came back to the Aller place and found him fixing the gate latch. He had already fixed it the morning before. He fixed it again anyway." Temperance said, "Why did he fix it again?" Mrs. Cordell said, "Because it needed fixing, and because you were watching." Temperance sat with that for a moment. She thought about the gate latch. She had not thought about it since October, but she thought about it now. The image of him in the yard, working the latch with the patient deliberateness of a man doing something that needs doing, and her watching through the kitchen window. He had known she was watching. He had fixed it again anyway. "That told you something," Temperance said. "About him," Mrs. Cordell said. Yes, Temperance poured more coffee. Mrs. Cordell accepted it. What did it tell you about him? Temperance said. Mrs. Cordell looked at the ceiling briefly, in the manner of a woman organizing a thought she has had for some time. That he does things right when he is seen and when he isn't, she said. And that he would do them right for you specifically, which is a different thing from doing them right in general. Temperance looked at her coffee cup. She thought about the morning she had arrived and the way he had walked across the yard. She thought about every morning since, and the gate latch, and the horses introduced by name, and the account books laid open with the matter-of-fact directness of a man who thinks the person he is working alongside should know what the operation is worth. She said, "He does things right." Mrs. Cordell said, "He does." She finished her coffee and stood and said she would come again Thursday. And she came on Thursday and the Thursday after that. And the county church in December had Temperance and Cade both in the third pew, which the county received with the settled satisfaction of people who had been paying attention and are glad to find themselves right. The carpetbag was in the bedroom. It was not going anywhere. The Aller letters were in a small box on the writing desk. She had brought the desk from the Aller ranch when the probate was clearing. Aller's letters went in the box, and the box went on the desk, and the desk went in the room she used for accounts. It was not a shrine, and it was not denial. It was the accurate record of a decent man whose letters had brought her to Los Animas County, and she kept it with the same care she kept all accurate records. She had come here for one man and found another. The man she had found had known, before she arrived, what he was going to do with the gate latch. He had done it correctly the first time, and then again when she was watching. Because correct was correct regardless of the audience. She understood that quality. She had it herself. Two practical people who do things right. In a county with a north section running at partial capacity and a fence line that was now entirely hers. You do not plan for that. You simply arrive and set the bag down and stand with your hands free and look at what is actually there. What was there had been there all along. She had simply needed to arrive to see it. The carpetbag was in the bedroom. The fence was sound. The north section was going to carry 120 head by fall. That was the accurate accounting of the situation. It was a very good situation, and she had arrived at it by arriving at the wrong thing first, which was sometimes how you found the right thing. You paid attention when you got there, and you dealt with what was real.